Hi, it's me, Ingrid FP, and we're going through this book, Autismhandboken by Katarina Sörngård, a Swedish book about autism for late diagnosed autistic people. And I'm a late diagnosed autistic person. However, this book is written by a neurotypical, so this is the regular disclaimer that she is promoting masking, which, even though she says that she doesn't really, she actually does. And I'm here to kind of translate this book into things that autistic people can actually work with to live a more fulfilling life in an unmasked way. So this is about communication and dialogue and mutual conversations. And she talks about different kinds of conversations, so debates, discussions, dialogue, small talk. And then she talks about monologues. She is not for monologues. And autistic people are often doing monologues, often because we get very intense about the topic, or we might want to speak so that we don't forget what we're about to say, because our working memory might be shit. And we might have difficulty of letting another person in and to lower the tempo. I actually watched a video not so long ago by Chris and Debbie about masking, and one way that certain autistic people might mask is by monopolizing a conversation so that they have control over it, because suddenly if they are being asked questions, then, you know, as an autistic person, then you're losing control over the situation, which is very distressing. So I think that there is a point to this of like, okay, learning to have an organic conversation without having to always be monopolizing the whole thing or not talking at all. However, we should speak in the way that feels natural to us, and often that is a monologue, kind of. And she talks about, you know, like gauging the person's interest before you get into a monologue. Sure, you can, but I don't think that we should accommodate to neurotypical people or people who are not interested for the rest of our lives all the time. Okay. She talks about avoiding details. Having too many details in a story will make the other person uninterested. And I'm guilty of that, okay? I have a YouTube channel where most of my videos are like half an hour long and nobody watches my videos because it is boring. Sometimes we just have to speak, okay? She talks about, like, you could maybe preemptively say that please interrupt me if you know, if I'm speaking too much, which I don't think is great though, because like neurotypical people, she does say that a lot of neurotypical people will not interrupt you because they don't want, they want to seem nice and they don't want to seem rude. So either they won't interrupt you because they don't want to seem rude, or they will interrupt you because they themselves are rude. And so yeah, I don't think that line of conversation is actually going to lead anywhere. But yeah, she talks about coming to the point, which I find that there is a time and place to come to the point, which we'll talk about later. I don't think that we need to necessarily come to the point directly when we're having a story. I think that the whole fun in telling a story is often for me to go into the context and the details beforehand, because the actual point of the story is in the details, you know? And this is just a difference of perception between autistic people and allistic people, or just neurodivergent people and neurotypical people, in that, you know, neurotypical people are not interested in all this extraneous detail. Like, for them it's just irrelevant and fluff, but for us might be the actual importance of the story. So we talked on the last video about the NBG strategy, and we have the example person Åsa. She uses it in a doctor's visit, and actually that's kind of a good place to do this because it is only 15 minutes that she has this doctor's visit. However, I will make a separate video about this. I don't think that our goal in going to the doctor's office is to be as quick and to the point as possible. Sometimes you need to speak a little bit more fluff. But yeah, I'll make a separate video about autistic people going to the doctor's office because I happen to be a doctor and I happen to be autistic, so I've been on both sides of this. Then we've got our other example people also using the NBG strategy, needs, backgrounds, goal. Yeah, and in different situations like at work or yeah. And then she talks about how it's difficult sometimes for autistic people to know what to say because we don't come up with anything to say. And I think that there's no problem with that. But she recommends masking, which no, okay. She talks about preparing conversation topics, which I think that as, you know, high masking autistic people, we know about this, you know. I think that most of us, and it's true for me too, that we've prepared conversation starters or topics that feel comfortable to talk about. And she also talks about scripts, and I think that I've learned scripts, you know, like, how was your weekend is one of those kinds of scripts. And it's good to know some of these scripts, you know, because we're dealing with strangers and we have to mask in order to like get around in society and in life. But I don't think that we need help with that. And I don't think that it's something that we should promote. You know, why should an autistic person ask how your weekend is going to be when they're not interested? You know, that kind of sucks. And then she talks about having a list of conversation topics on your mobile phone, looking at the news, avoiding risky topics like politics and that kind of thing. I think that, you know, sometimes somebody needs to break those taboos. And sometimes I think that we are also way too nice about like pushing ourselves down and making ourselves small. So yeah, I don't want that. She does say that if to her credit, she says that if somebody says something that, you know, is bigoted or discriminatory, you should say something about it. And that she says that is great, that autistic people will stand up for that kind of thing. So, or against that kind of thing, I mean. So I'm glad about that. Then she talks about compliments, which I will also skip because, you know, I mean, yes, it's nice to compliment somebody if, you know, if that ever comes up, but you shouldn't be like going around and looking for things to compliment others on unless you really want to do that, you know. It's not a requirement for being a social person in the world, you know. How many neurotypicals just don't compliment other people? You know, maybe we want to do this just so that like the world is a little bit less sad, and I'm all for that. She does say about saying thank you, and I am all for that. So I think that we should say thank you for people who have helped us or who are just doing a good job, you know. And so I think that, you know, I would like to live in a world where people are more thanked and people are more complimented on, and, you know, but, you know, it has to come from a genuine place. And so if you're just doing it because it's the way to fit in, then that's not a good reason to do these things. We're doing this because we want to be good people in general. And I think neurotypicals should work on this too, okay? So yeah, then we get about context. And this is not really about dialogue, but it's about like understanding context, which autistic people, I don't think that we have a hard time figuring out context. I think that we have a hard time figuring out what the neurotypical notion of context is. Autistic people, we love context. You know, we just said that in our stories that we like to have a lot of context, like a lot of premise before we get to the point of the story. But what we find is important to focus on is maybe not what a neurotypical autistic person will find interesting to focus on. And that can be a problem when you're studying, for example, where it's important to like look at the syllabus and see like, okay, what is it that I actually need to study? And not getting bogged down by learning about all sorts of other things within this topic. I think that a lot of autistic people burn themselves out by trying so hard to just learn everything about the subject. Same at work, that we go above and beyond to fulfill expectations that weren't even ours to begin with, you know? We think that the only way to do a good job is to go 110%, and to really invest in ourselves, because people are always saying like, you should work 100%, you know, you should put it, you're all in. When actually neurotypical people don't put their all in their work. And it's not expected for you to do that. So I think that is good to say, because that is something that leads to a lot of people going into burnouts, especially autistic person. So I think that is good. However, then she goes back into the masking and I will skip a little bit here. She talks about, you know, keeping yourself to the point so that people get interested, and not being too negative, which sure, I think that we could all, you know, do with a dose of optimism and not being negative all the time. However, I think that is a dangerous message to tell somebody to not complain or to not be negative. I think that often as autistic people, we might be very focused on what is going on in our own world, and not seeing that maybe other people, you know, are not interested in that. It is a sad world that we live in, considering that. But I think that what we might just say is that's how life is. You know, we might just be complaining because we're just saying how things are. Other people might think that you are criticizing the system or that you're criticizing them, when really you're just stating facts. Or like how this affects you. So I don't know. I people seem to think that I complain a lot, and maybe I do, but I think that it's important to complain. I think that it's important that autistic people complain, because we're kind of like the canary in the mine, you know, where it's like if something doesn't go well for the autistic person, then that means that it is actually affecting everybody else as well. And if nobody were to complain, like, you know, the neurotypical people won't be the ones complaining. They might be thinking all of this deep down, but they're not willing to say it. So yeah, I don't know, but it is important to sometimes know how to mask, because, you know, maybe you need to keep your job or that kind of thing. And so if your boss sees you always complaining, then you might not have that job for that much longer. And that really sucks, you know? But that's basically a misunderstanding. Anyway, then there's something again about masking that annoys me, and it's letting go of wrong things or things that are false. So I think that it is important that autistic people have their perspectives on things. And I think that we have that sense of justice, and maybe it's not healthy to ignore when things are wrong. Some things might be less important in the larger context, which is what that's the point that she's trying to make in this book. However, I think that sometimes even small things are important. Anyway, and I think that it's important for us to complain, because otherwise we would never get anywhere. Nothing would ever change. So I will agree with some of the things here, but most of the things I will not. So we have these different example people, and yeah, I think that it's important for autistic people to be passionate about the things that are important to us. And so yeah, maybe we could be a little bit more choose our fights a little bit, choose your battles. My mom used to say that quite a lot, but I don't think that we should completely just ignore everything that doesn't sit right with us. So one thing that I think here that could be good to not do is here Åsa is one of our example people, and she is going to the cafeteria with her friend, and then her cafeteria says, the person that she's going with, she says that she's going to choose the gluten-free menu because her stomach doesn't the gluten doesn't really do well for her stomach. And Åsa knows that her friend is not gluten intolerant and never got a medical diagnosis for this. And she just says that it's actually a myth that gluten is the problem here. And so she argues with her friend, and then the friend doesn't want to talk to her. So she does one of these chain analysis, the CBT chain analysis things. And then she realizes, maybe I shouldn't really comment about what her friend is eating, because it's her own business. She doesn't need to poke herself into her friend's business. I think that in this case, it's a pretty good thing that Åsa has learned to not get into an argument about another person's choices. But I think that, this is very individual for each case and for each person, and how much energy are you willing to spend on this certain topic, and how important is it that another person follows your code of ethics, or what you think is correct. So I think that this isn't specific to autism. It's more just a fact of life that, sometimes you have to choose your battles, but it is important to express your opinions. So there needs to be kind of a balance there. Here is another example that kind of frustrates me a little bit, though, is that Eric is a scientist and autistic, and his wife Lena is neurotypical. And every time that Lena is going to go and buy some bananas, she says that she's going to go buy some fruit. And Eric says, no, actually bananas are a berry, not a fruit. And he feels this urge every time that he has to say this. And Lena gets really mad at him, because it's yeah, okay, so what? Bananas are a berry. I'm just going to keep calling it fruit because that's what most people call it. And I don't know, I guess that this is just a small quibble that they keep having, but I hope that it doesn't blow up into something big. It depends how important this is for Eric and how important this is for Lena. I think that it probably isn't that important, but for Eric, this is quite a big thing. he needs he needs bananas to be called berries and not fruit. And I think that if Lena really like appreciated Eric for who he was, and she would just see that, oh, this is just one of Eric's quirks, you know, and be okay with calling bananas a berry. Or maybe she will just like keep calling it a fruit and then just like take it as a funny inside joke that they both have. That, oh, every time that she will call it a fruit, he will call it a berry, you know, and that's just how it is. But Lena's taking it a little bit too far, I think, of like getting annoyed by him getting annoyed. I don't know. It's just a funny example that they have. Then there's another example which is, I don't think harmful in itself, but it's his son has been taught at school. His son is 8 and has been taught at school that Pluto is a planet. And he gets really frustrated that it's wrong. Pluto is not considered a planet anymore. And he says that to his son, and then his son gets really upset. I think that is just a different way of looking at things. I think that he wasn't wrong in saying to his son that it wasn't correct information. I think that instead he should just go and explain to him that, like, well, Pluto used to be a planet and a lot of people still consider it a planet, but those people aren't updated in the field of neuroscience, of astrophysics, and therefore, you know, Pluto isn't actually a planet. You know, so he could like argue his case. It's not wrong for him to explain this to an 8-year-old. And it kind of helps the 8-year-old to understand that, like, oh, well, his teacher wasn't wrong, really. She was just uninformed on the topic. And I think it's good for children to learn early that adults are not infallible beings, you know, and that we, you know, even teachers might have wrong information or inaccurate or outdated information. You know, it's not entirely wrong that Pluto is a planet. It's just not a planet in the current definition of what a planet is, you know. And so, yeah, I don't think that it was actually a big problem. Anyway, then there's the strategy of distraction, of distracting yourself. When you are in a situation where you need to, you know, choose your battles. So what you can do is that basically she does what I'm doing with this book, is that she reads the book as long as she can, or she decides that she's going to have an alarm clock for this is the amount of time that she's going to read, and she has a paper and a pen next to her, and every time that she sees something is wrong, she writes down what is wrong, and then she keeps reading. And that way she can get closer to her goal of actually reading the book. She has to read for her studies. And with time, you might be able to read a whole chapter without getting extremely angry at the contents. So actually, that's kind of funny, because that is what I'm doing with this book, is that I am bookmarking with a red little tab all the things that I find are wrong, and just moving on. Because otherwise I would be using a lot of energy just getting angry at this book. So, funnily enough, I've been using the author's own strategy against her own book. Anyway, then we get into something that I think that neurotypicals should be using, is using I statements instead of you statements. So say how you are feeling or thinking about the situation or about what's going on, as opposed to saying you, because that is more of like a blaming kind of statement, like a criticism. So I think that we've heard this all before, but it's like saying, instead of saying that somebody is really negative and you're always complaining, you could say instead, I feel really sad, and when I feel criticism directly when I come home. Or you always think that you know best. Instead of saying that, you could say, I understand that it's important for you to say how you see things. I'm glad that you're honest, but it would be better for me if I could also say how I feel about certain things. Can we let each other speak first before the other person speaks? I think that that's quite healthy communication. So this is something that Jarmo has to say to his parents, because his parents are always putting themselves into his stuff. Like, they're always nosy and always wanting to help, but like not in the way that Jarmo wants. So he says, I feel stressed out, and I feel like I lose the motivation to do anything when you guys do everything that I need to do. I know that you have good intentions, and that you're worried that I don't start things. But for me, it would be better if I could do the planning, and I could do this together with my social worker, and that I could do things in the way that I want them to be done. It's most important is that it is done, not that it is done in the way that you guys want. Which I think is good. For Eric is, we don't know what his job is. He's a university teacher, but maybe also a PhD supervisor. Anyway, he says, instead of saying it is wrong, your paper is wrong, or your paper is not well written, it's better saying, I have understood it in this way, or I think that things work in this way. I've read what you've written, it's interesting, but I think it would be more clear to formulate it in this way, you know? So that makes sense. Then she finally comes to the art of saying no, which she calls the parrot strategy. And this is something that I've learned in medical school as the broken record strategy. So basically, you just say the same thing again and again. You don't over-explain yourself. So Åsa has a friend who keeps wanting to loan money from her and never giving it back, and is using her in a sense. And so instead of explaining that, oh, I don't have money right now or whatever, she says, no, I don't have the possibility to do this at this time. I cannot pay you. I cannot give you money. So she's like, no. And then her friend keeps trying to persuade her. And then she says, no, I'm not going to giving you money. And then the friend is like, one more time. It's like, what? You always give me money, you know? And she's like, I understand that you need money, but no, I cannot. So she just keeps repeating the same thing. And that kind of makes people realize that they can't win you over and they'll give up. This is something that doctors use with difficult patients. They'll be like the patient wants, wants opioids or something, and you don't want to give it to them as a doctor, and they'll be like pressing you, and then you'll be like, no, I'm not going to be prescribing this medication. and the patient goes on again, and then well, back, no, I'm not going to be doing that, and then no again, you know, rather than going into, you know, really convoluted discussions with a patient or just whoever you're talking to. However, she does say about an exception to this is if you're really close to a certain person and just saying no might not be enough, because that means that you're hiding something, and so that makes it even more difficult for you. So you can't just say, oh, I won't be able to come to eat dinner with you tonight, that's all, you know, when it's your partner that you're talking to, you know. No, I won't be coming to dinner. And then the partner is like, why? And then you're like, no, I'm not coming to dinner. That would be wrong, because that kind of implies that you are doing things behind the other person's back, which is never really good for a relationship. So yeah, in that case, maybe the broken record strategy is not the right strategy. But otherwise, it's used to work when it comes to, you know, strangers that don't actually need to know everything about your situation. So yeah, and then in the last part here is Jarmo uses a diagram instead of talking or writing in words. And I think that a lot of autistic people are visual thinkers, and so I think that is a pretty good way to do things, is to draw them or ask the other person to draw it, rather than, you know, stumbling over words all the time. So yeah, that's it. In the next part, we will be talking about relationships, which is a big part here. And then I think that we'll have one part about flexibility and planning, and another part about how to get routines. And then I think that we'll be done with this book finally. So yeah, have a great day, everybody. Bye.